Hello, welcome to a presentation by LoTi Connection. Today we're going to be talking about turning up the heat for academic success. I'm your presenter, Lachelle Morsch. The first thing we're going to talk about is the building blocks of HEAT, the research base, and then the four components: higher order thinking, engaged learning, authentic connections, and technology tools. Many people ask us why HEAT. People ask us, why should we use this model? How will this improve what we are doing? The HEAT model is resting on the digital age best practices. The HEAT model is resting on the digital age best practices. These practices have been shown to have statistically significant effects in the classroom when used consistently. The digital age best practices are promoting shared expertise through network collaboration, bolstering purposeful inquiry through student questions, personalizing and globalizing content by making authentic connections, accelerating individual growth through horizontal differentiation, accelerating individual growth through vertical differentiation, anchoring student learning with digital age tools and resources, clarifying student understanding with formative assessments, and implementing student-centered learning environments. The digital age best practices are aligned to the NETs and 21st century skills. They demonstrate statistically significant impact on student achievement. They employ existing classroom digital tools and resources, and the results can be generalizable to any K-12 classroom. The HEAT framework. First, keep in mind that if you observe students doing something or nothing in the classroom, then you are witnessing a level of HEAT in action. The amount of HEAT is dependent on what the students are doing. HEAT is not a program or another thing to do. HEAT is simply a lens we use to discuss the level of student learning in terms of higher order thinking, engaged learning, authentic connections, and technology use. It would be inaccurate for a teacher to say, "Today I'm doing my HEAT lesson." Keep in mind that the heat is always there whether you are measuring it or not. Much like you always have a temperature, you only measure it when you are not feeling well. The HEAT framework is a measurement of the health of the classroom. The research base. These are 3 articles. There are many others. If you'd like to find the research base for the HEAT framework, please go to loticonnection.com. We're going to be looking at 4 videos today. The links to the videos are also provided on another document. In order for this activity to work, you will need to stop this video and show the classroom videos in context as we get to them. The first building block of HEAT, higher order thinking. In the HEAT framework, we use 2 different models to look at higher order thinking. One of them is Bloom's taxonomy, another is Webb's depth of knowledge. Today we will be using Webb's depth of knowledge to discuss what is going on in the classroom. The first video is called Rocks. It is from an elementary classroom with a science content. The first question you should ask after watching this classroom activity is, if you saw this lesson at your school, would you like to see it again? The second question is, if this teacher asked you for suggestions, where would you start? Was the student cognition level low or high? Now, let's consider this video based on a specific set of look-fors. The higher order thinking section of the HEAT framework. There are 6 look-fors at this level. But the first one has students taking notes only with no questions asked or no questions asked. And the highest levels are at the highest levels of the Webb's depth of knowledge. As we consider the level, it is helpful to consider an if-then statement. If the students were doing a specific fill in the blank there, then the thinking level would be, and that helps you sometimes decide where that thinking level is. Let me show you an example. Consider this. If the students were filling in the graphic organizer created by the teacher, then the students are applying their learning at the skill and concept level. Before I could decide, I would need to ask how much guidance the teacher provided on the compare and contrast portion of the lesson. If the teacher created the graphic organizer and the students are filling it in, then this level is at a 3 on the HEAT framework. Students are applying their learning at the skill and concept level. Consider, For this lesson to be at the strategic thinking level, the students would need to be discovering their own descriptive facts and then determining how the graphic organizer should look. By filling in a graphic organizer created by the teacher, the students are following her analysis rather than doing their own. Another lesson example that takes higher order thinking into account would be to imagine a lesson where students are asked to compare and contrast two speeches from different historical figures. In the first implementation of this lesson, students see the two speeches side by side and are asked to do the comparison on their own. What might happen if the students were given the two speeches and asked to list the items that speeches have in common? Many students might find this challenging because the language of speeches is often complex. Consider another option. What if instead students were shown two word clouds that represented the same two speeches? Review the two word clouds below and decide which one is the inaugural speech of President Kennedy and which one represents the inaugural speech of President Obama. Choose at least two words to support your choice and be ready to explain them. This is speech A. Is it Obama or Kennedy? Look at the words you see, the words you don't see that you might expect to see. This is speech B. Does it represent the speech by Obama or Kennedy? Again, look at the words you see and the words you don't see. Choose two words from this speech and then compare it back to speech A to see, are those same words found there as well? Speech B, speech A. Speech A represents the inaugural speech by President Kennedy. Speech B represents the speech given by President Obama. How does having the students analyze the two speeches change their ability to then proceed with an assignment comparing and contrasting the two historical speeches? We have found that by giving students the word clouds, it allows large pieces of text to be more accessible. Now let's consider the second building block of H.E.A.T, engaged learning. In engaged learning, at the highest levels, students collaborate to define the task, the process, and/or the solution. It is rare that students have the opportunity to collaborate on all three pieces. You're looking for a piece, one or two of those items usually. Collaboration at the highest levels extends beyond the classroom. What would you expect to see and hear in a classroom of engaged students? Students who are engaged often lose track of time. They get excited about what's happening. They challenge others' ideas, and they connect emotionally to the content. Can students be involved in the classroom but not engaged in the learning process? Let's explore the level of engaged learning in the following video. At this time, stop the H.E.A.T orientation video to show this slam poetry video. The engaged learning framework focuses on the difference between teacher-directed problems and the levels of collaboration involved. At the lowest level, students are reporting what they have done only. The difference between a 2 and a 3 is that a 3 requires a teacher-directed problem. Please be aware that a problem is not something as simple as we assigned these math problems from the book. A true problem given to students means that there is open-ended opportunities. Usually there are at least two or more solutions, multiple solutions, or multiple strategies for getting the solution. Also, the different levels take into account the amount of collaboration and whether or not that collaboration extends beyond the classroom. Again, consider the if-then statement. If the students were blank, then the engagement level is blank. An example, if the students were collaborating with students at other schools to write better poetry, then the engagement level is a 6. Before I could decide, I would need to ask how much collaboration beyond the classroom was involved. Where do students have an opportunity to make those choices, to to collaborate on the process, product, or content. It is most often not at the content level. The content is heavily driven by state and local standards. The place where students have the most opportunity to participate or collaborate in influencing what's going on with the learning activities are in the process or the product of the lesson. In John Goodlett's A Study of Schooling, they observed that on the average, about 75% of class time was spent on instruction, and that nearly 70% of that was talk, usually teacher to student. Barely 5% of the instructional time was designed to create students' anticipation of needing to respond. That is a very important phrase, anticipation of needing to respond. How is that generated in a classroom? Sometimes stopping for a few moments for a think, pair, share increases the student's anticipation of needing to respond. They understand that at some point in the lesson, they are expected to respond. A good guideline is stopping 1 minute for every year the students are old. For students who are 5 and 6 years old, they need to have some type of clarification or activity every 5 to 7 minutes. In a classroom where students are 15 to 18 years old, they need to stop again also for every 15 to 18 minutes to have an opportunity to do something as simple as a think, pair, share or other more complex feedback structures. Compare two lessons. In the first lesson, students are asked to go to an interactive whiteboard to drag animals, plants, and objects from a clip art pile into 3 categories of omnivores, carnivores, and herbivores. In the second lesson, students are taken to a nearby creek to capture a container of water to examine living versus non-living animals, plants, and objects that they find, and that leads to a glass gardening project to protect the stream from pollution. They will still need to classify their findings, but the students will have a better context for that. Example 1 is at the lower end of engaged learning. Example 2 would be at the higher end. The third building block of HEAT is authentic connections. At the highest level of authentic connections, the learning experience is directly relevant to students and involves creating a product that has a purpose beyond the classroom that directly impacts students. The look fors for the authentic connections section are looking at how the learning experience ties back directly to the students. Let's explore the level of authentic connection in the following video. Please stop the HEAT synopsis video at this time to show the PE video on health. Let's look again at the look fors for authentic connections, keeping that video in mind. What was the performance task? How did it tie to the students? Did it tie to the students directly? How extensive or limited was the world relevance? It helps to put it back into the if-then statement. If the students were blank, then the authenticity level is blank. Before I could decide, I would need to ask. Considering the following, if the students were changing the health practices of their family, then the authenticity level is a 6. Before I could decide, I would need to ask how the students feel the product impacts them. Another example of a lesson would be this culminating performance task. Students will work in teams representing either the Republican or Democratic campaign strategists for the 2012 presidential election and devise an action plan strategy to flip a targeted state for their candidate. Remember, it only requires 270 electoral votes to get your candidate into the Oval Office. To further clarify the culminating performance task, this teacher gave students 3 guidelines. They must include a justification for selecting their particular state to flip. They need to identify the major issues that would be discussed and debated in that targeted state, and create a multimedia presentation to share goals, objectives, and actions for one targeted state. The website 270 to Win provides an opportunity for students to look at historical data as well as what might happen if specific states flipped during an election. In this context, the authentic connection provides real-world relevance and an opportunity for students to apply their learning to a real-world situation. Since students don't vote themselves, there is less direct impact on their lives. The fourth building block is technology use. At the highest level of technology use, students are using self-selected digital and/or environmental resources to accomplish learning outcomes beyond the use of conventional strategies. The look-fors for the technology use connect directly back to who is choosing what they will use. For example, did the teacher give the students two choices? Are the students choosing the technology they need at the time they need it in the same way they would use a pencil? Or is it being isolated from a lesson in a lockstep, teacher-driven way? Let's explore the level of technology use in the following video. Please stop the H.E.A.T orientation video to show this classroom video based on the Promethean board. Returning back to the technology look-fors, you're looking for who was using the technology and what was it being used to accomplish. It, again, is often helpful to consider the if-then statement. If the students were using technology to complete a sorting activity that could have been done with paper cutouts on a felt board, then the technology use level is a 3. Before I could decide, I would need to ask what other types of activities the student would be doing. In this particular activity, the teacher is leading whole group instruction with digital and/or environmental resources. It is possible, based on other activities, that the technology itself was not needed for task completion. However, in this particular opportunity, the teacher is using the Promethean board to give students an opportunity to interact with their material in a slightly different way. Remember, H.E.A.T is not a program or another thing to do. H.E.A.T is simply a lens we use to discuss the level of student learning in terms of higher order thinking, engaged learning, authentic connections, and technology use. When you're in the classroom and you're trying to determine the level of a certain activity, most often the helpful thing to do is ask the students what is going on. How does this connect to what you did yesterday? What do you think will be happening next? How do you think this part of the lesson is going to connect to the next part of the lesson? If students are highly engaged in the lesson and are collaborating with the experience, they will be able to answer these questions. Again, my name is Lachelle Morsch. My email address is lachelle@loticonnection.com. If you have any questions about this video or any other LoTi Connection materials, please email me. Goodbye for now, and thank you.